that Alpha's heir wouldn't stop crying. Until a lowly Omega broke every sacred rule. The Alpha's roar rattled the stained glass windows. 4 hours. For 4 brutal hours, his newborn heir had screamed so hard the stone itself seemed to shake. Warriors shifted restlessly. Servants wept behind closed doors. Even the moon slipped behind a bank of clouds, as if she couldn't bear to watch. Then a sound no one expected. Bare footsteps, slow, determined. A kitchen Omega stepped out from the crowd of cowering servants, her apron stained, her hands shaking, her eyes lit with something reckless and bright. "Drag her out," the beta snapped. But before the guards could move, the girl whispered, "Alpha, let me try." The hall went deathly still. Kyle Draven, warlord of the North and Alpha of the Nightwind pack, stared as this nobody of an Omega walked right up to him and the wailing child in his arms. Her scent wasn't expensive perfume or battle steel. It was soap, smoke, and wildflowers after rain. Stubborn, unpolished courage. Without waiting for permission, she held out her arms. The chamber erupted in gasps as she took the screaming air from his chest. She pressed the pup to her heart and began to hum. The melody was old, older than the banners on the walls. One of the moon songs the elders had forbidden long ago. The child's screams faltered, hitched, softened. In less than a minute, the fortress that had been a cage of sound fell into stunned silence. The Omega lifted her gaze to the Alpha, eyes bright with unshed tears but utterly unafraid. "He isn't sick, Alpha," she whispered. "He's grieving. He can feel you breaking." And for the first time since the night he lost his mate, the most feared Alpha in the North felt something inside his ribs crack open, not from battle, but from the touch of an Omega who had no right to understand him at all. The cry wasn't a baby's soft whimper. It was a serrated sound that clawed through stone and marrow alike. It ricocheted off vaulted ceilings, sank into old banners, and slithered under the skin of everyone trapped inside Nightwind Fortress. Wolves who had faced battle without flinching now winced like children at each raw, ragged scream. Servants rushed back and forth with milk, warmed blankets, and steaming bowls of herbal steam. Healers muttered over tinctures. One even tried a minor calming spell, until the Alpha's glare alone nearly stopped his heart. None of it mattered. The Alpha's heir howled on. Kyle Draven stood in the center of the nursery, a dark monolith among fluttering shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair tied back in a rough knot at his neck, he looked like a war carved into a man's shape. His hands, usually so steady on a sword hilt, shook as they hovered uselessly near the cradle. "Again," he said, voice low and dangerously calm. The nursemaid flinched. Her eyes were rimmed red, braids coming loose. "We've tried every tonic, Alpha," she whispered. "He won't settle." Nightwind Fortress had endured siege, famine, and the wrath of rival packs. It had never faced this, the thin, relentless cry of a 6-week-old pup who refused to be comforted. The heir's tiny chest rose and fell too fast. His fists were tiny knots of rage and terror. His face, flushed scarlet, looked almost inhuman with how long he'd screamed. "He's my blood," Kyle thought, heat and ice tangling in his chest. "My son? He should be strong. He should have been born under an auspicious moon, greeted with feasts and celebration. Instead, he'd arrived in blood and panic, under a sky streaked red, while his mother gasped her last on the birthing bed. Asha. The name stung like a fresh wound. Kyle forced the thought away. One of the healers cleared his throat. "Alpha. Prolonged crying like this can damage the lungs. If we don't fix it," Kyle growled without looking at him. "Or get out." The healer swallowed his next words and retreated to the cluster near the wall, where whispers were already starting to curdle. "Maybe it's a curse," someone breathed. The moon marked him wrong. She took the Luna and left her shadow in the child. "Shut your mouth," the beta snapped. But the word curse had already slithered into the air like smoke. Kyle's head lifted, eyes glowing faintly gold. "Who said that?" he asked softly. Silence slammed into the room. No one answered, no one breathed. "I will not ask twice," the nursemaid trembled. "Alpha, they didn't mean—" "Everyone out," he said. "Now." The order rolled over them like a physical blow. Servants scurried for the door, skirts and boots whispering against stone. Healers followed, heads bowed, clutching their vials and scrolls like useless shields. Soon only Kyle and the screaming pup remained. The sound felt different when he was alone with it, less like noise, more like accusation. He approached the cradle slowly, each step heavy as if the stone resisted him. His hands curled into fists, then unclenched. The boy was small, too small. Asha's delicate features ghosted his own, her slight nose, her lashes. The way the corners of her mouth had always wanted to curl up, even when she was furious with him. "Stop," Kyle rasped, the words scraping out of a throat gone unused to pleading. "Enough. You'll shred yourself to pieces." The pup screamed harder. Kyle reached down with shaking fingers, then recoiled as if the tiny body might burn him. He'd given battle commands without hesitation. He'd ripped enemies apart with his bare hands, but touching his son, touching this last fragile remnant of Asha, felt like walking naked into a blizzard of knives. "Why can't I?" His jaw clenched. The tiny creature in the cradle gasped on a sob, and for one fractured heartbeat, met his gaze. Not really seeing, but feeling. Something inside Kyle shifted. He reached down and awkwardly lifted his son. The pup's cry hitched, then sharpened. A scream against his chest. Kyle's heart hammered. "Fine," he whispered, voice half snarl, half prayer. "Scream, hate me, just don't die." Outside, clouds devoured the moon. Inside Nightwind Fortress, the Alpha of the North, feared, undefeated, unyielding, stood helpless with his heir in his arms, drowning in a sound he couldn't silence and a grief he refused to name. The kitchen walls shook. Wooden spoons rattled in their jars. A metal pot vibrated across the stove, clanging an off-key rhythm to the distant screams. Mira nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. She'd heard the Heir cry before. Everyone had. But this was different, longer, sharper, threaded through with something that made her own chest ache in sympathy. "Don't you dare stop stirring," barked old Henna, the head cook, slapping a ladle into Mira's frozen hand. "Broth burns, Alpha screams, pups cry, and we still have mouths to feed." Mira blinked, fingers tightening around the ladle. "He sounds worse," she said quietly. Henna snorted, tossing a pinch of salt into a boiling pot. "He's an Alpha's heir. They come out loud and stay that way." The other Omegas snickered nervously, but no one met each other's eyes. The pup's cry skated along their nerves, too sharp to ignore. Mira turned back to the cauldron, steam dampening the curls at her temples. The smell of bone broth and herbs should have grounded her. It didn't. Because beneath the echo of the baby's voice, she felt something else. A thrum, a pulse, a note of pain that resonated in her own ribs, like she was a tuning fork someone had struck too hard. Her wolf stirred uneasily. "He's afraid," Mira swallowed. "Henna, have the healers." "The healers are doing what they can," Henna cut in. "And what they can't, they'll blame on curses and moons and old stories best left buried." "Keep stirring, girl." Mira bit her tongue. She wasn't high-ranked. She wasn't educated in ancient rites and pack magic. She was just an Omega from the lower village who knew her place and scrubbed floors until her hands cracked. But she knew the sound of a lonely child. The kitchen door banged open. A guard stalked in, armor clinking, eyes bloodshot. Henna straightened. "Core." "Alpha wants more tea," he grunted. "Stronger." The room went quieter than the grave. Mira risked a glance. Core had watched his brother die in the skirmishes last winter and hadn't made a sound. Now his hands shook as he reached for the tray. "He's still crying?" Mira asked before she could stop herself. Core's gaze snapped to her. For a second she saw pure, shredded exhaustion there, then it hardened into a glare. "Stay in your place, Omega," he snapped. "You don't speak about Alpha matters." Mira dropped her gaze. "Yes, Guardian." Behind his anger, she smelled something else. Helplessness. Fear. He turned to leave. Mira's wolf pushed against her ribs. "Say it. Say something." "Wait," she blurted. Henna hissed like a boiling kettle. "Mira!" "What if he's not hungry?" Mira forced the words out, eyes fixed on the floor. "What if he's not sick? What if he's just feeling everything?" No one breathed. "The Heir is not some soft-bellied pup," Core snarled. "He'll be Alpha one day. He doesn't cry because of feelings." Except the current Alpha clearly did. The whole fortress could feel his grief bleeding into the stone. Mira's mind flashed back to her little brother, gasping through fever, clutching her shirt as he cried. He'd stopped only when she'd curled around him and sung until her voice broke. He died anyway. The memory still tasted like smoke and salt. I only meant, she said, cheeks burning. Sometimes, babies scream because no one is with them. Not really, they feel it. Henna thumped her cane once. Enough, she said. You want to be tossed out into the snow for impudence, girl? Cor grabbed the tray and stalked out without another word. The kitchen's clatter resumed, louder than before, as if everyone had silently agreed to drown out the noise from above. Mira stirred. The broth swirled. The pup's cries tore at her insides. Her wolf paced, restless. Go to him. I can't, she whispered, though no one had asked. In Nightwind Fortress, an Omega approaching the Alpha's heir without permission was a good way to end up a story people told their pups not to repeat. But the longer the heir cried, the more the sound shook something loose inside her. By the time Henna barked, "We're done here, out with you," Mira's mind had already made a decision her mouth hadn't dared speak. She left the kitchen with her heart pounding against her ribs, her feet turning, not toward her cell in the servants' wing, toward the stairs. The stairway that led to the upper levels of Nightwind Fortress was not meant for Omegas. It was polished white stone, lit by flickering wall sconces. Banners hung in the high shaft, each painted with scenes of Alpha victories, Khal standing on battlefields, his wolf form crowned with blood and moonlight. Mira had cleaned those banners before, from below. She had never climbed the stairs this far. Her bare feet made almost no sound, but to her, each step boomed like a drumbeat announcing her execution. "You're insane," she muttered under her breath. The pup's scream rolled down the stairwell like a wave. Her wolf answered with a low, anxious whine. "He's drowning in it. Move." At the next landing, 2 guards blocked the corridor. Both were tall, armored, and radiating the weary ferocity of wolves who hadn't slept. One of them, the same Cor from the kitchen, straightened as he saw her. "You again?" His eyes flashed. Mira bowed her head. "Guardian, You have no business up here." His voice filled the hall like a growl. "Turn. Around," her pulse thundered. This was the moment her common sense should win. Instead, she heard herself say, "He won't stop, will he?" Cor's jaw flexed. "This is not your concern." 4 hours, she whispered. "I can feel it in my teeth." The other guard shifted uneasily. "I haven't seen the Alpha like this since." Cor shot him a look. The man clamped his mouth shut. "Mira," Cor said slowly, as if choosing her name tasted wrong. "Go downstairs, now, before you lose more than your tongue." She lifted her chin a fraction. Her legs trembled, but she didn't move. "If no one else can help," she said, "what harm is there in letting me try?" "The harm," Cor snarled, stepping closer, "is that if the Alpha sees you near his heir, he might tear your head off. And then Henna will yell at me." The pup's cry hit a higher pitch, cracking. Mira flinched. So did both guards. Her wolf shoved. "We are wasting time." "Please," she said, the words scraping against her pride. "He's not just loud. He sounds like he's losing himself." The second guard muttered, "Maybe let her." "You want to die on the Alpha's floor?" Cor snapped. "Do you want to keep listening?" Mira shot back, surprising even herself. Cor stared at her. Something in his shoulders sagged. "Stupid girl," he muttered. "You'll get us all flayed." Then, against his better judgment and every rule beaten into him since birth, he stepped aside. "I was never here," he said. "You were never here. If you're dragged out in pieces, tell the moon I tried." The other guard gaped. "Cor." "Shut up and look scary," Cor hissed. "It's the only thing we're good at." Mira dipped her head, throat thick. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she moved past them before her courage disintegrated, heart thudding, mouth dry. The pup's screams pulling her down the corridor like a tether. The double doors to the great hall loomed ahead, carved with wolves and moons and battle scenes. Beyond them, the air burned with Alpha rage. Mira placed her palm against the cold wood. Her wolf pressed up against her ribs. "We go in together." She drew a breath that tasted like the edge of a cliff, and pushed. The doors groaned open on a rush of cold air and noise. It was like stepping into the mouth of a storm. The roar of the crying pup rolled over her first, raw and jagged. Beneath it, a deeper sound rumbled through the bones of the fortress, a low, dangerous growl that made her wolf flatten against her ribs. Kyle Draven stood on the dais like a statue carved from night. His cloak spilled around him in black waves. Golden light from the chandeliers struck the edges of his jaw, and the faint scar that cut through one brow. In his arms, the tiny Heir thrashed, a knot of red skin and wet lashes. The hall was full. Betas, warriors, healers, high-ranked wolves in their finest layers, all gathered around as if waiting for a verdict. Every pair of eyes swung her way at once. An Omega in a flower-stained tunic, standing in the Alpha's great hall. Mira's feet went numb. Her fingers curled into her skirts to hide the shaking. She could feel the weight of their outrage before anyone spoke. The Beta to Kyle's right snapped first. "Who let her in here?" Two guards shifted guiltily at the back of the room. Mira heard someone hiss, "Drag her out before he sees." "Too late," Kyle said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It slid through the hall like a blade, cutting every whisper to nothing. He turned his head toward her, slow and deliberate. His eyes found her across the distance, a pair of molten gold irises in a face hardened by too much loss and not enough sleep. "Come here," he said. Not a question, an order. Her legs unlocked. She walked. Each step rang in her own ears, though she moved as softly as she could. Wolves shifted out of her path like she was carrying an infection. One healer made a sign against the evil eye. The chandeliers trembled faintly with every rise in the pup's shriek, crystals clinking together like nervous teeth. By the time she reached the base of the dais, Mira's heart was beating so fast she could feel it flutter in her throat. She kept her gaze low. Only the edge of Kyle's boots and the hem of his cloak filled her vision. "Do you know where you are, Omega?" he asked. "Yes, Alpha." Her voice came out softer than she liked, but it didn't break. "I'm in your hall." "And do you know," he continued, the cry in his arms scraping raw down both their nerves. "What happens to servants who wander where they shouldn't?" She swallowed. "They're punished." "That's right," his tone was almost conversational. "So why are you here?" Everyone leaned closer on that breath. They wanted to hear fear. They wanted to hear backtracking. What came out of her mouth surprised even her. "Because your son hasn't taken a full breath of peace since he was born," she said quietly. "And I can't stand there and listen to him cry himself into a grave while everyone else tries the same things over and over." The silence afterward was violent. A few jaws actually dropped. Someone muttered, "She's gone mad." The Beta's voice cracked. "Alpha, allow me to remove her. She's out of line." "Be very careful," Kyle said, without looking at him. "About telling me who's out of line in my own hall." Whatever the Beta had been about to say shriveled on his tongue. Kyle shifted his grip on the screaming pup. The child's tiny body arched against his chest, fingers clawing uselessly at his dark tunic. The sound was thick and miserable now, hoarse from overuse. "If this is insubordination," Kyle said, eyes fixed on Mira, "it's unusually specific." He descended from the dais with the Heir cradled against him. Up close, the Alpha was worse. Too much. Heat. Power. The kind of presence that made the air feel thin and sharp. The scent of rain, iron, and old smoke wrapped around him. He stopped within an arm's length of her. Mira tried not to flinch as his shadow fell over her. "You think you can do what my healers cannot," he said. "I think I can try," she answered. "You've let everyone else fail. You might as well let me fail too." Some idiot somewhere made a strangled noise that might have been a laugh. It died immediately under Kyle's stare. Mira swallowed and went on quieter. "I don't know herbs or spells. I only know sounds, feelings, and that this isn't just pain." "What is it then?" he asked. She dared a glance up. The gold in his eyes flickered, ringed with something she recognized a little too well. Exhaustion trying very hard not to look like despair. "He's overwhelmed," she said. "You are a storm inside these walls, Alpha. He feels every drop of it and thinks it belongs to him." A muscle jumped in Kyle's jaw. "You presume much, Omega." "Yes," she agreed. "I do. Let me hold him, and if he screams harder, you can throw me down the stairs yourself." The gasp that rolled through the hall this time had actual horror in it. Kale's wolf surged behind his eyes, power thickening in the air. For a moment, Mira thought she'd gone too far, that he'd snap her neck just to make an example of her. Instead, something like curiosity cut through the rage. "And if he doesn't scream," he asked. "Then you owe me a new pair of legs," she said, because when she was terrified, her mouth tended to misbehave. Kyle stared at her. Then, in one slow, careful motion, he lowered the air toward her. Every instinct she had screamed at her to back away. Touching the Alpha's bloodline uninvited was the oldest, hardest law in the North. Wolves had been executed over less, but the pup's cry hitched in that moment, cracking on a broken inhale, and Mira's wolf went forward without her. She lifted her arms. The child landed against her chest in a warm, squirming bundle. He was heavier than he looked, solid with that strange new baby density, and terribly hot. His fist drummed against her collarbone, his face turned up in a furious red knot. "All right, little moon," she whispered, instinct taking over where thought burned out. "All right, I've got you." The hall vanished. There was only the weight in her arms, the smell of milk and salt and baby wolf musk. Her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. Long nights with her brother, a one-room cottage, a storm banging at the shutters while he sobbed against her chest. Back then, no one had come. This pup had an entire fortress, and yet, somehow, he was just as alone. Mira swayed on her feet, cradling him close, letting his cheek press to the hollow beneath her throat, where her heartbeat thudded loudest. Her lungs burned, her eyes stung. She opened her mouth. The song came out. Before she realized she'd chosen it. No words, just a low, winding melody her mother had hummed while husking corn or easing fevers. The notes rising and falling like a slow tide. It wasn't one of the formal hymns the elders approved. It was older than that. Wild. A thread of sound that had the moon's name woven into it without ever speaking it. The effect was slow, but it was there. The pup's scream tripped, turned into a hiccup. His fist loosened. His tiny fingers curled into her tunic instead, clutching fabric instead of fighting air. His jaw worked once, like he was testing silence for the first time, and then nothing, no scream, no sob. Just a tiny shaky breath, and another, the sound leveling out into a soft snuffling sigh. The hall didn't seem to breathe at all. Mira's voice trembled but kept going, carrying the lull into gentler territory. Her wolf settled under her skin, pressing her closer to the child, giving up heat and calm and whatever else she could spare. He went boneless against her, his head lolling trustingly on her shoulder. When she finally let the last note slip into the quiet, Nightwind Fortress was the stillest she'd ever felt it. It was as if the stone was listening. She didn't dare move. Her arms were starting to ache, but she didn't care. If he woke screaming the second she stopped, they'd blame her and she'd take it. But the pup only sighed, little mouth falling open, breath puffing warm against her neck. Mira's throat tightened. Someone whispered, hoarse and unbelieving, "By the goddess!" The beta's voice shook. "What did she do?" "She sang," another voice whispered back. "That's all." "That is not all," one of the elders hissed. "That was a moon song, the old kind. They were outlawed for a reason." "Look at the child," a healer breathed. "Outlaw whatever you like. He's sleeping." Somewhere behind her, glass clinked quietly as someone's hand shook against their cup. Mira kept her eyes closed a moment longer, breathing in time with the pup. Only when a low voice spoke directly in front of her did she look up. "How?" Kyle asked. He stood less than a stride away, closer than any Alpha had ever been to her without violence attached. The golden burn of his gaze had softened around the edges, but the intensity had not. Mira swallowed. Her mouth was dry. "I told you," she said. Surprised her voice still worked. "He's not cursed. He's not wrong. He's listening. He thinks all this noise inside you is his fault." Kyle's eyes flickered. For the first time, the mask of iron control cracked just enough to show the rawness beneath. "My fault," he repeated. "He's yours," she said simply. "There is no space between your wolf and his. You drown. He chokes." The words hung there between them, taut. He glanced at the child, then back at her. "You presume again," he murmured. Yes, she said. But, so far, I'm the only one in this room who has stopped him screaming. A strangled sound came from the front row of nobles. The elder who'd spoken before stepped forward, robes rustling. His gray eyes flashed with outrage. Alpha, this is unacceptable, he said. She's a kitchen girl, an Omega. She has no right to ancient songs, no right to lay a hand on the heir. This breach of order art. Kyle didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Breaches of order, he said, are what happen when the order fails the ones it exists to protect. The elder recoiled as if struck. Kyle took a step closer to Mira and his son, close enough now that his scent wrapped her fully, pine, storm, iron, the faint trace of wolf musk that said he'd been too restless to shift in days. Give him to me, he said. Her heart lurched. For a breath, her body tried to hold tighter. Her wolf panicked, whispered, He'll wake. He'll scream again. You'll lose him back to the storm. But this was his father. Mira adjusted her grip and very carefully transferred the warm little weight back to Kale's arms. The air stirred, brow crinkling. One tiny hand caught on the edge of Kyle's cloak. Mira held her breath. The pup sighed, and then stayed quiet. His cheek sank into the Alpha's chest, as if that's where he'd been trying to get all along. Kyle's shoulders shifted slightly, the smallest of shudders passing through them. He looked down at the child, then back at her. You risked your life, he said softly. Mira's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. You risked yours first, letting an Omega take him out of your arms. Touché, he muttered. The elder's voice cracked again. Alpha, there must be punishment. If you let this stand. Kyle cut him a look that could have peeled flesh. You are fond of the old laws, he said. Do you remember the oldest? The elder's mouth tightened. The Alpha's word is Moon's will. Exactly. Kyle turned slightly, his voice rolling across the hall like distant thunder. Hear this, then, as Moon and Law. He shifted his son in the crook of one arm and extended the other toward Mira. This Omega will not be punished, he said. From this night on, Mira of the lower kitchens will serve as the heir's keeper. She will have quarters adjacent to his. She will answer to me before any other. If a bomb had gone off, the shock in the room could not have been louder. Mira's lungs forgot how to function. Her ears roared. Keeper of the heir, not slave, not criminal, not nothing. She's an Omega, someone managed to choke. What will the other packs think? That Nightwind chooses usefulness over vanity, Kyle said. Let them think it. While they are busy choking on their outrage, we will be busy keeping our pups alive. His gaze slid back to Mira. Do you understand what I've said? He asked. Yes, she breathed. You've just terrified your entire court for my sake. Something like a ghost of humor flickered in his eyes. For his sake, he corrected, inclining his head toward the sleeping child. You are just inconveniently attached to the solution. Mira's stomach did a strange little flip at the word attached. Then Alpha, she said carefully. I'll do what I can to remain inconvenient. A few wolves actually coughed on air. Kyle's lips twitched. See that you do, he murmured. And as the hall slowly, reluctantly unclenched, wolves bowing, elders glowering, the beta rubbing the bridge of his nose like he'd aged 10 years, Mira realized she'd walked into the storm fully expecting to die. Instead, she'd walked out with the one thing she'd never planned for. A place. The days that followed reshaped themselves around that choice. Her new quarters were small but clean. A chamber tucked beside the nursery with a bed, a wash basin, a chair, and a narrow window that looked over the inner courtyard. The first time she stepped inside, she almost turned around and went back to the servants' bunk room out of habit. No one stopped her. That was new too. Where servants had once barked orders at her, they now lowered their eyes and stepped aside, some out of respect, some out of fear. It was hard to tell which hurt more. Henna cornered her the second she slipped down to the kitchens for bread. You stupid girl, the old cook grumbled, smacking her lightly on the arm with a wooden spoon. What did I tell you about interfering in Alpha business? Mira held up the loaf like a shield. That it'd get me killed. And I'm not dead. Henna's eyes softened around the edges, pride and worry fighting there. No, she muttered. You're something worse, noticeable. Mira's throat went tight. You're not angry? I'm furious, Henna said briskly. You left mid-shift. You disobeyed me. You've turned half the fortress into gossiping hens and the other half into zealots. She paused, then reached out and gripped Mira's chin, forcing her to look up. And you kept a child alive, she said, so the moon can take my temper before she takes my thanks. Mira leaned into the rough warmth of her hands for a heartbeat. It was the closest thing she'd had to an embrace in years. Go, Henna said gruffly, letting her go. Your boy will wake soon. My boy. The words snared in her chest as she made her way back upstairs, still warm with stolen bread. The heir, named Ryan, she'd learned after hearing Kyle murmur it under his breath, woke exactly as Henna had predicted, with a soft little complaint more than a cry. Mira lifted him, tucked him against her shoulder, and hummed the Edge of the Moon song. He relaxed immediately, small body melting into her as if he'd been carved to fit there. You really are dramatic, you know that, she whispered. 4 hours of screaming, and all you needed was a melody and a heartbeat. He gurgled something back that might have been a protest. Fine, she amended. A melody, a heartbeat, and a father who stops trying not to feel. She wasn't aware Carl was in the doorway until he spoke. I heard that, heat shot up her neck. She spun, nearly dropping the bread and the baby both. Alpha, she stammered. I didn't hear you come in. Good, he said dryly. It means the wards around you are working. I'm not keen on anyone else slipping in here unannounced. He stepped fully into the room, making it feel smaller by sheer existence. He'd shed his formal cloak. A simple dark shirt clung to his shoulders, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The scar through his brow made his expression look perpetually stern, but his eyes had lost the frantic edge they'd had that first night. Ryan spotted him and wriggled, issuing a soft, insistent noise. Mira smiled. Someone wants you. Kyle hesitated. It was subtle, but she caught it. The tiny hitch in his movement, the flicker of old fear. He forced his shoulders to relax and held out his arms. Mira shifted Ryan toward him. Their fingers brushed as the baby changed hands. A spark slid up her skin where they touched. A prickle of heat that had nothing to do with wolf rank or fear. She pulled back quickly, hiding it by fussing with Ryan's blanket. He hasn't screamed like that since, Kyle said, voice quiet, eyes on his son's now calm face. Not once, she said. He fusses, that's normal, but that storm? No. Because you're here, he said. Because you're here, she corrected softly. Not pacing holes in the hall outside. Not snarling at everyone who comes within 10 paces. He can tell the difference. A ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of Kyle's mouth. You lecture your alpha as if you weren't almost executed 2 nights ago, she winced. Is that off limits? The smile twitched wider for half a heartbeat. Moon, no. If my own court is too frightened to speak truth to me, I'll take it from an Omega with more courage than is practical. Her heart did that stupid little flip again. Too much. Too close. Mira shifted her weight. Would you like to sit? There's only 1 chair, but I can... He shook his head. I'll walk. He paced the small length of the nursery instead, rocking Ryan in a rhythm that, she noticed, matched her song's tempo. The baby dozed, occasionally making a soft, almost contented sound. The sight of them together, a lethal alpha softened around the edges by this small, trusting shape, did something uncomfortable in her chest. You'll never have this, a small, cold part of her whispered. Omegas don't become anything but breeding stock or background noise. She cleared her throat. I should finish mending his sleep wraps. Kyle nodded without looking. At her. Mira, she paused at the table, fingers tightening on the fabric. Yes, Alpha? Thank you, he said. The simple sincerity of it rooted her to the floor. For what? She asked quietly. He looked up then, eyes catching hers across the dim space. There were tired lines at the corners that hadn't been there before Asha died, she guessed. But beneath the weariness, there was something steadier now. For making me hold my own son without feeling like I was about to crush him, he said. For reminding me that grief isn't the only thing left in these walls. Her throat closed. You did that, she managed. I just hummed at the right moment. Humility doesn't suit you, he said. You did much more than hum. She didn't have an answer for that, so she went back to her mending, and he walked his slow line across the room. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Nightwind as a half-starved teenager, Mira felt something that was almost like safety. It didn't last. good things never did in her experience. It started 3 nights later with a storm. The first rumble of thunder woke her. She sat bolt upright in her narrow bed, heart hammering, old memories slamming into her. The cottage, the leak in the roof, her brother's rattling breath fighting against the rain. Ryan's cry cut through the second breath of thunder. Not the hoarse, endless wail from before. This was thin, weak, wrong. Mira was on her feet before she fully registered moving. She stumbled into the nursery next door, bare toes cold on stone. The air in the room felt off. Heavy, too warm. Ryan lay in his cradle, cheeks flushed an ugly deep red, breath coming in short, shallow pants. His eyes were half open, unfocused, lashes stuck together with sweat. "Ryan," she whispered, scooping him up. Heat poured off him like he'd swallowed the storm. His cry cracked and cut out halfway, leaving the rest locked behind gritted gums. "No, no, no," she breathed, pressing her hand against his tiny ribs. His heart fluttered under her palm like a trapped bird. The healer they dragged in first was already half drunk from some feast below. He sobered quickly under the look she gave him, and the sight of the child burning up in her arms. Fever drafts were fetched, cool cloths, compresses. One healer whispered a spell, tracing symbols in the air that glowed faintly blue before fading without effect. "It's not responding," he muttered, fear creeping into his voice. "Do something else," Mira snapped. "You're supposed to know more than how to line shelves with dried leaves." He swallowed. "It feels wrong. There's a resonance. As if something is eating through his bond with the Alpha and feeding from it." "That's not helpful," she said sharply. Someone went to fetch Cole. He arrived like a thrown spear, barely dressed, hair loose around his face, eyes already burning with that dangerous gold as if his wolf had been pacing too close to the surface. "What happened?" he demanded. The healers stumbled over each other, trying to explain. Kyle didn't listen, not really. His attention locked onto his son limp in Mira's arms, and everything else became background noise. The room dimmed at the edges, the storm outside blurred. He stepped closer, reaching out. When his fingers brushed Ryan's burning forehead, his wolf howled in his skull. "Take it out of him," he growled. "Whatever this is." "We're trying," one healer stammered. "It's not good enough," Mira said. She didn't mean to interrupt. The words just tore out of her. Kyle looked at her sharply. She met his gaze head on. "You feel it," she said. "Don't you?" He did. A strange, wrong pull in his chest, like something was trying to gnaw its way along the bond between him and his son. His wolf bristled, teeth bared at an invisible foe. "The wards," he said. "Is this an attack?" The oldest healer cleared his throat nervously. "Alpha, there are tails. When grief sits too long on a bloodline, it can twist, draw things, hungry things. The fever may be bound to—" Kyle's growl shook dust from the rafters. "You're blaming my grief for this?" "I am saying," the healer said quickly, "that what is between you and the Heir runs deep. Something might be feeding from both ends. This is no common sickness." The room dipped for a second. Mira tightened her grip on Ryan. "Then we cut it out," Kyle said. "Tell me how." "The old ways," the healer whispered. "But those rites were forbidden generations ago. They cost—" "Say it," Kyle snapped. "They cost blood," the healer finished. Mira's wolf pushed hard against her bones. She felt half sick, half strangely clear. Of all the things she'd expected when she crept into the Alpha's hall days ago, old rites and hungry spirits weren't on the list. But her instincts recognized the shape of what was happening. Something had been drawn by Kale's constant war with his own heart, and had decided an unshielded pup made a fine feast. "That song," she said slowly. "The night I first held him, the old men called it a moon song." Every head swung toward her. "Those melodies were once used to tie," the elder healer said reluctantly. "Breath to breath, life to life. The Luna line used them in the very beginning, when pups were born too weak to hold their bonds alone." "So use it," Kyle said. "Tie mine to his." The healer recoiled. "No, Alpha. If the bond is already the path of infection, any further joining could drag you down too. We might lose both of you." Silence dropped like an axe. Kyle's jaw clenched. Fear and fury warred in his eyes. Mira looked down at the pup, burning and gasping against her shoulder. She heard herself say, "Then use mine." The words hit the room like lightning. Kyle stared at her. "Mira? I'm not bound to anyone," she said, voice shaking but steadying on each syllable. "My wolf sits quiet most days. I have nothing to pass along but what I choose to give." The elder healer sputtered. "You can't suggest." "I'm not suggesting," she said, surprising even herself with the steel in her tone. "I'm offering." She turned to Kyle fully. "If something is chewing on the bond between you and your son," she said, "you can't risk tightening it. You know that. You're smart enough to know when the fight you want is the one you can't take." A muscle jumped in his cheek. "But you can," she went on. "I can. I sing, I bleed. I let the moon take whatever piece of me it wants, in exchange for more time for him." "No." Kyle's voice was iron. "Yes," she shot back, not flinching. "Or what? We stand here and watch him boil from the inside because we're afraid of an old song?" "This isn't just a song," the healer hissed. "It's binding, soul work. If the goddess takes you at your word, your life won't be entirely your own afterward. If he sickens again, you sicken. If he dies, then I die," Mira said, "which, with respect, is not the worst bargain I've been offered in this fortress." Kyle's wolf slammed against his ribs hard enough to make him sway. "It's my son," he growled. "If anyone binds to him, it should be the one who already knows the song," she cut in, "and the one who isn't holding the weight of an entire pack on his shoulders. You fall, Nightwind falls with you. I fall, the kitchens mourn for a week, and Henna swears at the sky." Her heart pounded. "You made me his keeper. Let me keep him." Thunder cracked outside, so loud it rattled the window glass. For a heartbeat, the storm and the war inside Kyle felt like the same thing. He stepped closer, so close she had to tilt her head back to keep looking at his face. Ryan's heat seared between them. "Do you understand," he said, each word careful, "what you are asking the moon to do to you?" "No," she admitted, "not fully. I only know what she's already done to him, and I refuse to stand here and watch." "You could die," he said. "I already did," she murmured, before she could stop herself. "The night my brother burned up in my arms and no one came. This would at least mean something." His eyes changed then. Not the gold of rage, not the dim amber of exhaustion, something deeper, softer, more dangerous. "Mira," he said. And for the first time, her name on his tongue sounded like more than a label. "If I lose you and him both because I was too afraid to stop you." "You won't," she said. "You're too stubborn." It was a terrible time to joke. It worked anyway. The corner of his mouth twitched. Just enough. He looked at the healer. "What must be done?" The old wolf sighed, shoulders slumping in resignation. "You invoke the binding under the moon," he said. "On silver, with blood freely given and breath shared. If the goddess thinks the bargain is foolish, she'll ignore you." "And if she doesn't?" Kyle asked. "Then the little Omega girl," said the healer quietly, "will never again be able to stand entirely apart from your heir." Mira exhaled. "Sounds like I'd finally belong somewhere." The ritual was simple, in the way knives were simple. They carried Ryan to the narrow balcony off the nursery, where the storm had just begun to tear open its own belly. Rain walloped the stone, blown sideways by a feral wind. The moon hung behind clouds, a dull glow like an eye behind frost. Mira knelt on the slick stone, skirts soaked immediately, Ryan cradled against her chest. Kyle stood just inside the doorway, jaw clenched so tight she thought he might crack a tooth. Healers huddled in the shadows, murmuring counterspells in case something unexpected attempted to ride the right. "Once we begin, there is no calling it back," the healer warned. "If she loses consciousness, you must not break contact." "Do it," Mira said. She held out her left hand. The healer pressed a small silver knife into it, the metal cold and humming faintly with old magic. "Your palm," he said, "not the wrist. We are not making you an offering. We are making you a bridge." She swallowed and drew the blade across her skin. Pain flared. Hot, quick. Blood welled up, dark and bright all at once in the lightning flash. She pressed her bleeding palm gently against Ryan's bare chest. He was so hot she almost yanked away. Instead, she pressed firmer until her handprint smeared across his fevered skin. Now, the healer said hoarsely. Sing. Mira tilted her head back, rain plastering her hair to her shoulders, and pulled the song up from the roots of her bones. It wasn't the same version she'd hummed in the hall. The melody stretched, deepened, reached for syllables she'd never been taught. The words weren't words at all, just sounds that felt like the shape of wolves howling under a new moon, like the hush between heartbeats. The air shifted. The storm's roar faded to a muffled hush, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. The rain still fell, but the drops seemed to slow in midair, gliding past them instead of slamming down. Mira felt the faintest brush of something cool and vast at the back of her mind. A presence. Old, patient, utterly uninterested in mortal ideas of fairness. Goddess, she thought, without forming the apology fully. I know I'm not one of your chosen. I'm not a Luna or a seer. I'm just... The next note tore through her and up, and the presence pressed closer, as if to say, I know exactly what you are. Keep singing. Her blood shimmered under her palm. Silver light traced the lines of her handprint, then seeped inward, sinking through skin, muscle, bone. Ryan jerked. Mira gasped. She felt it then, not the bar. Fever itself, but the thing entwined with it. A hook made of hunger sunk into the pup's tiny heart, yanking in time with his father's unspoken hurt. Without thinking, she tugged back. Pain ripped through her own chest, hot and sharp. Her lungs burned, her head spun. She heard someone shout her name from very far away. She sang louder, the silver light flared, spreading from her hand across the pup's chest. Fine tendrils of brightness spilled from his sternum, weaving around her fingers, climbing up her arm like vines. They burned. Enough, Kyle snarled, only half aware he'd stepped onto the balcony. The magic slapped him in the face like cold water. Stop this. You're tearing yourself apart. Don't touch her, the healer shouted. You'll spoil the binding. Mira dimly heard both voices. They felt like echoes bouncing around a cavern. The only sound that mattered was the song and the thin, rattling breaths under her hand. She poured more of herself into the next verse. Memories, scraps of childhood. Her brother's laugh, the way Henna's hands smelled like bread and onions. The first time she'd seen Kyle's profile cut against the winter sky and thought, he looks like someone who doesn't know how to rest. Take it, she thought, at the presence coiled around them. Take what you want. Just leave him something to grow with. Lightning split the sky. For one blinding second, the moon flashed clear through the torn clouds. A sharp, perfect silver coin staring directly at them. The presence pressed in. She felt a cool hand, if you could call it that, touch the center of her chest, the center of his, and then... Something clicked, like a latch thrown, like a door opening between two rooms. Heat rushed along her arm and slammed into her own heart. The fever ripped out of the pup like smoke sucked up a chimney and poured into her instead. Mira screamed, though the sound stayed inside her own skull. Every nerve lit up. Her vision went white, then black, then something stranger. All color and no shape. She saw a cottage roof and a fortress tower and a battlefield and a crib. She felt sand under bare feet, mud under knees, cold stone against her palms. She was small, then tall, then both, then neither. Threads wove through her. One pulsed alpha gold. One flickered with a newborn's pink warmth. One, hers, glowed a stubborn, steady blue-white that refused to go out. The presence watched. Then, with a sensation like teeth releasing, it withdrew. The storm came rushing back. Thunder roared, rain slapped, wind howled. Mira collapsed forward, barely catching herself on one hand. Her chest heaved. Sweat and rain and tears mingled, all of them salt. Ryan went limp. Mira! Kyle was there instantly, catching him, catching her as she swayed. For a heart-stopping instant, she thought the worst. Then Ryan inhaled. Slowly, deeply, cool. The heat that had burned under his skin was gone. His forehead, when Kyle pressed his lips to it, was damp but no longer scorching. He sighed, a tiny, contented little sound, and curled his fingers into Kyle's shirt. Mira sagged, every muscle trembling. That, she croaked, was unpleasant. Kyle laughed. It sounded broken and delighted and disbelieving all at once. You're alive, he said, voice rough. He's alive. You're both. He didn't finish. He simply pulled her against him, as if holding both of them was the only way to convince himself it was real. She let it happen, for a breath, just a breath. She let herself feel how right it felt. Her forehead against his collarbone, his chin brushing the top of her head. The steady thump of his heart, rattled but strong. Then her knees gave out entirely, the world tilted sideways. Kyle scooped her up before she hit the stone, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. He carried her inside, dripping and furious and terrified and awed all at once, with his son quiet against his chest and the Omega, who'd just bled herself into their lives, limp in his arms. He didn't let anyone else touch either of them that night. When she woke, the light was gray and soft, like the inside of a cloud. The smell was familiar, smoke, pine, a thread of something sharper underneath, leather and steel and wolf. Mira blinked. She wasn't in her own narrow bed. She was in a wider one, softer, with a heavy fur thrown over her legs. Her palm throbbed. When she turned her hand, she saw the cut bound in clean white cloth, little faint silver threads still tracing lines beneath her skin where the magic had soaked in. You're awake. She turned her head. Kyle sat in a chair by the fireplace, boots off, elbows on his knees. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, and like he'd fight a god bare-handed if it tried to take her back. This isn't my room, she said, because her brain was still catching up. His mouth twitched. Astute as always, the healers wanted you in the infirmary. I said no. That's not how rank works, she murmured. Luckily, he said, I am the rank. Her gaze flicked around. The room was large, high-ceilinged, with shelves along one wall and a desk buried in maps along another. A rack of weapons, a cloak hanging near the door. His room. Mira's cheeks heated. You brought me here? I wasn't going to leave you alone in a ward full of strangers after you just tied your life to my son, he said simply. This way, I could glare anyone to death who tried to prod you. Her heart tried to do that flip again. This time it somersaulted. Rian? She asked. Sleeping, Kyle said. Breathing, no fever. He's in his cradle in the nursery. We set up a cot for him near the fire when we brought you in. Mira exhaled. Some of the tightness in her chest loosened. And me? She asked softly. Did it work? Am I still me? His gaze deepened. Yes, he said. You're still you, just more. More? He leaned back, studying her with a look that should have made her squirm. The healers did their scrying, he said, muttered their mutters. They say there's a thread between you now. When he breathes, something in you echoes it. When his wolf stirs, yours bristles. Mira frowned. That sounds crowded. Are you in pain? He asked immediately. She took stock. Her palm hurt. Her chest ached like she'd run up the mountain and back. There was a strange awareness at the edge of her thoughts, like a small, sleepy presence curled up just out of sight. It feels like... She searched for words. Like when a storm passes. The air is too clean. I'm tired, but I can feel him, like a warm spot in a cold room. Kyle's shoulders eased. That's how binding is supposed to feel, he said quietly. You did it right. You sound surprised, she murmured. You terrify me, he corrected. That's different. She blinked at him. He held her gaze, no longer bothering to hide the rawness there. You walked into my hall unarmed, he said. You took my heir from my arms in front of my entire court. You sang forbidden songs at the moon and bled yourself dry on a balcony in the middle of a storm. Do you have any idea what that feels like to watch? She swallowed. You could have stopped me at any point. I tried, he said. You ignored me. You're the Alpha. And you, he said, are the only person in this fortress who has ever told me no and made me grateful for it afterward. The air between them thickened. Her breath hitched. Her wolf leaned forward. There were a dozen reasons she should look away, 100 more why she should climb out of this bed and back into the safety of her tiny room next to the nursery. Instead, she heard herself ask, very quietly, what does it feel like now? He took a breath, chest rising under his shirt. Like I have something to lose again, he said. and I'm not sure I know how to stand under that without breaking. Her throat ached. You're already standing, she said. That's most of it, isn't it? You make it sound easy. It isn't, she said. But you're stubborn. I'm bound to you and your son now. I'd rather not be dragged around by a wolf who keeps tripping over his own fear. A huff of laughter escaped him. He shook his head. You've just bled your soul into my bloodline, and you're still insulting me, he said. Impressive consistency. Someone has to keep you from turning into a statue, she said. His eyes softened. I think, he said slowly, you were sent here to ruin me. Her heart stuttered. Alpha. Kyle, he said. She hesitated. Kyle. The name tasted strange and dangerous in her mouth. It felt like crossing another invisible line. This one, she realized, she'd wanted to cross long before she'd admitted it. He stood, closing the small distance between the chair and the bed in a few steps. He stopped at the edge, close enough that she could feel the heat of him even through the fur. He reached out, then pulled his hand back, fingers curling. What now, she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Now, he said, I owe you more than I know how to repay. My son owes you his life. My pack owes you their future. And I owe you an apology. She blinked. For what? For every time I let my grief turn this fortress into a graveyard instead of a home, he said. You stepped into a place I'd made unlivable and chose to breathe anyway, and for the way I talked to you that first night. Like your courage was an inconvenience instead of the only thing keeping us all from falling apart. You were in pieces, she said softly. We both were. I just sang louder. He exhaled. You make it very hard to wallow. Good, she said. You're terrible company when you do. Their eyes held. His hand moved again, slower this time, giving her every chance to flinch. She didn't. His fingers brushed her bandaged palm. Heat shot up her arm, not the burning of magic. This was different. Softer, a spark catching in dry kindling. Her wolf leaned into it. So did his. You are not packless here, he said quietly. Do you understand that? You are not spare, not expendable. If any tongue suggests otherwise, I will tear it out. She huffed a small, shaky laugh. That's extreme. It's accurate, he said. Mira? The shout came from the nursery doorway. Henna, of all people, stood there, fist on her hip, eyes blazing. Kale straightened instinctively. Henna, he said. How did you— The guards tried to stop me, she growled. I told them if the pups of this fortress wanted to keep eating, they'd let me through. Her gaze raked over Mira, softening for exactly 2 seconds before swinging to Kyle again. You look better, she told the alpha. Less like someone stuck your heart in brine. Mira snorted. Kyle's mouth flattened. Is there anyone in this place who's going to speak to me with respect ever again? No, Henna said crisply. You've invited honesty in. It's hard to get rid of. She turned back to Mira. How do you feel? Like I ran 10 miles uphill and wrestled a storm, Mira said. Henna nodded, satisfied. Good, you'll live. She set a cloth-wrapped bundle on the table by the bed. Bread, soup. Eat all of it or I'll haunt you. You're not dead, Mira said. Don't test me, Henna replied. She left as abruptly as she'd entered, muttering about alphas and girls and moon-drunk rituals leaving pots unattended. Mira shook her head, smiling despite the ache in her bones. Kyle watched her, an answering curve tugging at his own mouth. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. Just listening to the sound of something, here that isn't crying or my counsel complaining. What does it sound like? She asked. Like I might actually want to be in my own home, he said. Time did what time always does in the weeks that followed. It moved, regardless of whether they were ready. The fever never returned. Ryan thrived, chubby limbs and curious eyes, his little wolf already testing its voice in the way he growled at shadows and tried to teeth on Kyle's fingers. Mira learned what it meant to be bound. The thread between her and Ryan tugged at odd moments, a sudden flutter in her chest when he stirred from a nap across the room, a phantom itch in her teeth when he gnawed too hard on a wooden toy. Once, she woke in the middle of a feast with the strange urge to roll onto her stomach and kick her legs, only to realize he'd just discovered how to do the same on his blanket upstairs. It was intimate, strange, sometimes overwhelming. It was also the first time in her life she'd felt truly necessary. The court watched, some with suspicion, some with grudging admiration, a few with open hostility. The elders grumbled about precedent. The betas worried about politics. The visiting nobles from allied packs asked pointed questions about why the Alpha's heir had been tied to an Omega instead of a carefully selected Luna. Kyle answered all of them the same way. She saved him, he said. You didn't. Mira tried to ignore the stares. She sang, she soothed. She laughed when Ryan discovered his own toes and cried when he took his first step from her arms to Kale's waiting hands. Once, late at night, when Ryan was finally asleep and the fortress lay quiet under a lazy half-moon, she found Kyle on the ramparts, hands on the stone, gaze on the dark line of the forest. She went to stand beside him without thinking. The wind tugged at her hair. Far below, wolves patrolled in their four-legged forms, eyes glinting faintly. You used to pace up here alone, she said. He didn't startle. He'd sensed her coming. I used to do a lot of things alone, he said. Didn't make them right. They stood in silence for a while. Do you ever feel it? She asked finally. What I feel, through him? He considered. Sometimes, he said, not as sharply. A tug when you're near him and you're anxious. A warmth when you're pleased. It's unsettling. Sorry, she muttered. He shook his head. It's also reassuring. When I'm gone from the fortress, I know if either of you is in trouble by whether the bond burns or not. You trust me that much? She asked quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had on the balcony when she was bleeding silver. Yes, he said simply. Her chest felt too tight. Kyle, she said, before she could talk herself out of it. That night, on the balcony, when you said you had something to lose again. Did you mean just him? His jaw flexed. No, he said. The word swung the world sideways. Oh, she said. That's all you have to say, he asked, with a strained half-smile. What do you want me to say, she replied, eyes stinging. I'm an Omega bound to your heir. You're the Alpha. There's a mountain of stories between what you feel and what you're allowed to admit. If I say the wrong thing, I live the rest of my life knowing I made this harder. What if, he said slowly, I'm asking you to say the wrong thing on purpose? She laughed once, incredulous and a little broken. You're impossible. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the thin fabric of her tunic. I'm stubborn, he said. There's a difference. The bond tugged at her, a faint echo of Ryan's contentment in his sleep. Mira, Kyle said. Look at me. She did. Whatever restraint he'd been clinging to fractured under the weight of that choice. I don't want a Luna chosen for politics, he said, voice low. I don't want a stranger in my bed who can recite lineage charts, while my wolf paces the walls looking for someone else's scent. Her breath hitched. What do you want? She whispered. You, he said, terrifyingly, inconveniently, entirely. The wind went very still. Her wolf surged up, pressing against his as if the space between their bodies wasn't made of air, but of something negotiable. This isn't how it works, she said. But the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. No, he agreed. It isn't. But the old ways also didn't plan for an Omega binding herself to the air with a moon song and living to complain about it. We're already outside the story. We might as well write the rest ourselves. Her eyes stung. What about the elders, she asked. The other packs? The law? The law, he said, says the Alpha's word is Moon's will. The elders will snarl and sulk, and then remember who keeps their walls standing. The other packs will gossip and speculate and send envoys. And when they come here, they will see my heir thriving and my pack stronger than it's ever been. They can read their omens from that. And if the goddess is offended, she whispered. He reached out, his hand hovering just short of her cheek. If she didn't want this, he said, she shouldn't have tied you to my bloodline and let me watch you save us twice. Her laugh broke on a sob. Stubborn, she said again. Say it like a promise, he murmured. Stubborn, she repeated, the word catching on something like joy. Fine, then I'll be stubborn too. He cupped her face gently, finally closing that last sliver of distance. His thumb brushed the edge of her jaw, calloused skin warm and careful. Tell me to stop, he said. If you don't, she rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was clumsy at first, She'd never done this before, never wanted to badly. Enough to risk it. Her nose bumped his, her hand grabbed his sleeve for balance. His wolf surged, then checked itself sharply at the feel of her trembling. He gentled the angle, one hand steady at her jaw, the other splayed between her shoulder blades, holding her like something precious, not fragile. His mouth was warm, he tasted like rain-soaked air and sleepless nights, and the first breath after a long cry. When they broke apart, her lungs dragged in air like she'd forgotten how. "Not very protocol," she whispered. "Good," he said, forehead resting against hers. "I'm tired of protocol." The moon slid fully free of the clouds then, washing the ramparts in cool silver. Far below, a wolf howled, a long rising note of something that sounded suspiciously like blessing. Life in Nightwind didn't turn into a storybook after that. They still had elders to argue with, territories to defend, alliances to manage. There were days when Mira woke with a pounding head because Ryan had spent the night learning to channel his energy into dreams of chasing shadows. There were nights when Kyle came back from the borders with blood on his shirt and exhaustion in his bones, and she had to remind him he wasn't alone in the bed anymore. But there was also laughter in halls that had known only echo. There were pups in the training yard who grew up hearing that Omegas could stand beside Alphas and sing the moon down if they had to. There were songs in the kitchens that blended Henna's curses with Mira's melodies, until no one could tell where scolding ended and affection began. Years later, when Ryan ran these walls in his own right, grown and sure-footed, scars on his arms and mischief in his eyes, the old wolves would still tell the story. They'd speak of the night the Alpha's heir screamed without stopping until a lowly Omega walked into the hall, ignored law and fear and rank, and did the unthinkable. They'd say that was the night Nightwind changed. But in the quiet places, the nursery where a lullaby first silenced a cry, the balcony where a storm-torn girl bled silver into a fevered pup, the ramparts where an Alpha finally bowed his head not to defeat but to love, the truth held. Change hadn't started when the crying stopped. It had started the moment someone listened and stepped forward anyway. And under the watchful eye of a goddess who had scattered their souls like embers and smiled to see them find each other, an Alpha, his heir, and the Omega who dared defy the story, lived not perfectly, not peacefully, but fully. Which in the end was the only kind of happy ending wolves like them were ever going to trust. Spring bled into summer so gradually that Mira almost didn't notice. One day there was still frost clinging in the shadowed corners of the courtyard. The next, children were tearing across the grass barefoot, shrieking with laughter while harried nurses tried to herd them away from the training yard. Ryan toddled, among them, the only one allowed to wander dangerously close to the Alpha's private practice ring, because everyone knew half the guards would throw themselves between him and harm before a pebble had time to think about bruising him. Mira watched from the shade of an arch, arms folded loosely, shoulder pressed to cool stone. Ryan's excitement tugged along the binding, little sparks of joy that fizzed in her chest whenever he discovered something new. Today it was a beetle. He crouched over it, hands on his knees, tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth in concentration. When the beetle spread its wings and clumsily took off, he let out a high sound that wasn't quite a howl, but definitely an attempt. Kyle stood in the center of the practice ring, wooden staff resting across his shoulders. Sweat glistened at his throat. His shirt clung to his back. He'd been drilling with the guard captain before Ryan's delighted shrieking had pulled both their attention. "He's going to be a menace," Mira called. Kyle glanced over, eyes bright. "Takes after his keeper." She wrinkled her nose at him. Ryan spotted her then and abandoned the beetle entirely, barreling over on unsteady legs, arms half raised. The bond tugged ahead of him. She was already bending down before he reached her. "Up?" she asked. "Up," he demanded, mangling the word but getting close enough that pride swelled in her. She scooped him up, settling him easily against her hip. His little wolf scent was stronger now. Grass, milk, a hint of pack musk that curled around her senses pleasantly. "You're supposed to be napping," she reminded him. He patted her cheek as if that answered everything. Kyle hopped down from the ring and strode toward them, staff tucked under his arm. He moved like the weapon was an extension of him, a lifetime of training evident in the easy grace of it. Henna says you've been stealing rolls from the ovens, he told Ryan solemnly. Ryan blinked, then hid his face in Mira's neck. Guilt washed faintly through the bond. She snorted. Well, at least he knows shame, she said. That's more than I can say for you half the time. Kyle arched a brow. Excuse me. You walk into council late and dare them to comment, she said. He sneaks bread like it's a high crime. Council deserves to be unsettled, Kyle said. Bread does not. Also, for the record, you're supposed to be on my side. She leaned into him just enough that their shoulders brushed. I'm on his, she said. You just happen to be attached. He hummed, low and pleased. The moment cracked when the courtyard gate opened and Joran strode in. Joran of the Ashval pack was all sharp angles and dark eyes, his hair braided back from a narrow face. He moved with the coiled ease of a wolf who knew his own strength and was used to people stepping out of his way. They didn't step as quickly here. Kyle straightened, the easy warmth in him hardening almost imperceptibly. Alpha, Joran called. I hope I'm not disturbing a family moment. Only if your presence is more important than my son's beetle, Kyle said, which I doubt. Some of the guards snorted. Joran's eyes flicked to Ryan, then to Mira. There was curiosity there, sharp as a blade. So it's true, he said. You've bound your heir to a kitchen, Omega. Mira kept her expression pleasant. The bond twitched with Ryan's confusion at the sudden tension. She smoothed it down with an instinctive mental stroke, humming under her breath. Kyle's jaw tightened. I have bound my heir to Mira Nightwind, he said. Guardian of the air, keeper of the moon song. If you're going to dismiss her, at least use her full list of titles. Mira elbowed him lightly for that one. Joran laughed, a short, sharp sound. You always did have a taste for dramatics. And you always did have a taste for underestimating people, Kale replied. What do you want, Joran? Joran's gaze lingered on Mira for a heartbeat longer than polite, then shifted back to Kale. Word spreads, he said. Other packs talk. They wonder if Nightwind has lost its mind or found some new trick. And Omega, as central as she is, might be a weakness, or something worse, a symbol. Mira bit back a retort. The bond rippled with Ryan's discomfort. She patted his back, soothing both of them. Symbols are only dangerous, Kyle said, if they show people what you've been hiding from them. And what is that? Joran asked lightly. That you don't have to crush half your pack under your heel to rule the other half, Kyle said. But you didn't cross 2 ridges just to insult my house. Get to it. Joran's smile thinned. I want to see it, he said bluntly. The bond. Mira stiffened. The air in her lungs felt too tight. Kyle's eyes went wolf gold in an instant. You're not touching either of them. I didn't say I wanted to, Corinne said. I want to see what happens if the binding is strained. A low growl rippled through the courtyard. The nearest guards had shifted weight subtly, hands drifting toward weapons. You want to hurt my son as a test, Kyle said, very quietly. Joran raised both hands, mocking innocence. Hurt is a strong word. Agitate, perhaps. Challenge. Push. So we know whether this experiment of yours is going to explode in all our faces when he comes of age, and his wolf pushes too hard against her. His gaze flicked to Mira again. You're brave, girl. I'll grant that. But bravery without consideration is just a prettier word for recklessness. Heat flared under Mira's skin. You think we didn't consider this, she asked. You think we stepped out onto a balcony in the middle of a storm and bled for fun? Joran's brows rose. So the rumors about the rite are true. Most of them probably aren't, she said. People like to add flourishes. The truth is messy and not nearly as poetic. Ryan let out a small, unhappy noise. The bond tightened. He could sense the wrongness in the air, even if he didn't understand the words. Mira shifted, rubbing the small of his back. Shh, little moon. It's all right. The words were mostly for herself. Kyle stepped half a pace in front of them, body angled so that any threat would have to go through him first. No one is testing anything on my family, he said. Find another spectacle. Joran studied him for a long moment. Interesting, he murmured. You use that word easily. Family. His eyes drifted to Mira once more. Does she wear that comfortably? Mira met his gaze squarely. She felt Kyle's tension like a pressure against her spine. I don't wear anything comfortably, she said. I lived in borrowed scraps too long. I earn it every day. Some would say, Joran mused, that you haven't earned the right to stand there at all, that omegas belong in the rear, not at the center. Some, Mira said, voice calm, haven't seen what happens when you ignore the ones at the rear until their only options are desperation or silence. He tilted his head, amused. You speak like someone who expects to be heard. I sing like someone who is, actually, she said. You came to see the bond. You're seeing it. Ryan's calm when I am. He frays when the air is full of challenge and teeth. She stepped sideways so she stood fully beside Kyle instead of slightly behind. If you push, she said, if you try to agitate him, you won't just get his reaction. You'll get mine. And I don't know if the goddess who tied us together will take kindly to someone trying to rip at her work. Joran's eyes flashed. Are you threatening me, Omega? I'm offering you information, she said. What you do with it is your choice. Silence stretched. Then Joran laughed again, this time less sharp, more genuinely entertained. You've picked a fierce one, he said to Kale. No wonder the elders are having fits. They'll live, Kale said. Or they won't. Either way this stands. Joran's gaze flicked between them, measuring something. Finally he nodded. Very well, I've seen enough. He turned toward the gate, then paused and glanced over his shoulder, this time speaking to Mira directly. For what it's worth, he said, if you survive the old guard here, you'll reshape more than Nightwind. She frowned. And if I don't? Then at least you'll have scared them first, he said. He left without waiting for a response. The tension in the courtyard bled out slowly. Guards relaxed. A child in the corner resumed trying to climb a barrel. Mira exhaled shakily. You all right? Kyle asked, shifting to face her fully. I hate him, she said automatically. You don't, he said. You hate that he put weight on a fear you already had. She scowled at him. Stop being emotionally literate. It's unnerving, he smiled faintly. Everything that matters is unnerving. Ryan poked her chin, babbling something that sounded suspiciously like hungry. She laughed, the tightness easing a little. All this talk of rituals and politics, and my boy wants a snack. That's my heir, Kyle said, pride evident. As she carried Ryan toward the inner hall, Kyle matching her stride, Mira's mind churned with things she did not say. Was Joran right? Was there a risk none of them could see yet? What would it do to Ryan, to her, when his shifting came fully in? When teenage fury hit the bond like a hammer? When Kyle's responsibilities pulled him away more often and the weight of being half-wife, half-kept secret became too heavy? Later, when Ryan slept and the fortress quieted, she asked. They lay in Kyle's bed, the fur thrown askew, the fire burned down to coals. Ryan's cradle had been moved permanently to the corner of this room, the nursery now more a play space than a sleeping one. Kyle's arm was draped over her waist. His fingers traced idle patterns on her hip, like he needed contact as much as breath. Are we breaking him? She asked into the darkness. Kyle's hand stilled. Who? Ryan. He shifted onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow so he could see her face. Mira, he said, why would you think that? Because people like Joran aren't stupid, she said. They're cruel sometimes, but not wrong about everything. This bond, it's not normal. We didn't grow up with it. What if we shape him into something that doesn't fit anywhere but here? He was quiet for a moment. Good, he said finally. She blinked. That's your answer? Yes, he said. Good. Let him be something that doesn't fit the old stories. Those stories carved half of us into shapes that bled. Let him be a new shape, one who grew up knowing his father loved him and his keeper stood her ground and his pack learned that power doesn't always come with a snarl. That's idealistic of you, she muttered. Terrifying, isn't it? He said. This is what you've done to me. She huffed a laugh. And what if he resents it? She persisted. What if he looks at us one day and says he never asked for a bond, for a mother who isn't a Luna and a father who broke tradition before breakfast? Then we listen, Kyle said, and we tell him the truth, that we were terrified, and we chose this anyway because the alternative was losing him, that we did the best we could with what we knew and were willing to change as he grows. That sounds messy, she said. Life is messy, he replied. You sang that to the moon when you offered your blood. Don't flinch from it now. She let that sit. Do you ever wish, she asked quietly, that you'd done it differently? that you'd waited for a proper Luna, tied him to someone with a noble house and a spotless family tree and no tendency to swear at elders. He reached out and brushed his knuckles along her cheek. If I had, he said, he'd be a story carved in stone, untouchable, unreachable, and I'd still be a man pacing empty halls, pretending grief is strength. His thumb traced her lower lip. I don't wish for different, he said. I only wish I'd had you sooner. Her throat closed. Mighty Alpha, she said thickly. You're going to ruin my reputation for cynicism. Good, he murmured. You never wore it well. Years later, when pups of their own beyond Ryan tore through those halls, when the elders had either adapted or retired to mutter their disapproval in private, Nightwind would be known for something new, not just for its warriors or its walls, but for the way the pack moved. No longer in clean lines of rank and silence, but in a woven pattern of voices, some loud, some soft, all heard. Omegas would still cook and mend and soothe. They would also sit in council when their insight was needed, stand at their alpha's side in dispute, lead rescue parties into storms, because they knew how to listen for cries other wolves couldn't hear. Ryan would grow tall and sure, his wolf bright and unafraid. When his first real shift cracked his bones into new shape, Mira felt it like a second heartbeat in her own, and Kyle stood witness with tears in his eyes. He didn't bother to hide. There would be challenges. There always were. Ryan would scream at them once, at 15, wild with the sudden rage of a wolf discovering how small even a fortress could feel when your skin didn't quite fit. He'd slam a door hard enough to splinter it, then freeze when the bond kicked, hurt ricocheting into Mira's chest. She'd find him on the ramparts in the rain, breathing hard. Do you hate me? He'd demand, voice cracking. For tying yourself to me? For never getting to be just you? She'd laugh then, wet and helpless. Oh, little moon, she'd say, cupping his jaw. You have no idea who I was before you. I was a ghost. You dragged me into the world. He'd shake, not believing her, until Kyle came up from the stairs and wrapped them both in his arms and growled, If you two don't stop apologizing for saving each other, I'm going to throw you off this wall and then jump after you because I can't live without either of you, and that will be terribly inconvenient for the pack. Ryan would snort despite himself. Mira would roll her eyes. The bond would settle. Some nights, when the fortress slept and the moon leaned low over the towers, Mira would slip onto that same balcony where she'd once knelt in the storm. She'd feel Kyle before she heard him, his presence a familiar weight at her back, his wolf brushing against hers in a slow, easy circle. Do you ever regret it? He'd ask sometimes, out of habit more than doubt. And she'd look at the lit windows, at the shadows moving behind them, at the faint echo of Ryan's laughter somewhere below, at the distant howl of a patrol that sounded more like singing than warning. She'd think of a crying pup, a kitchen girl with flour on her hands, an alpha who had forgotten how to breathe. No, she'd say, every time. Not once. Then she'd hum, voice low and sure, and the moon would listen, and Nightwind would sleep easy, held between an alpha who had learned that vulnerability didn't kill him, and an omega who had proved that tenderness could reshape stone. The child who once cried without stopping never cried alone again, and in a world that had been built on howls and hierarchy, that simple, stubborn fact was the loudest song of all. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next paranormal romance. Your support helps us keep bringing you more shifters, more fated mates, and more late-night escape listening.